Good afternoon, everybody. Happy Tuesday. I hope everybody's had a great day so far. This is Phil Russert, and this is Creatorcon Q&A. Today I have an exciting guest. I'm very happy to have him with us, and he's actually a true gentleman. The artist for Cable in the 90s and X-Men and you name it, and he's drawn it, and he's a phenomenal artist. He also has his own creator-owned project, Marineman. He's working on volume 2 right now. You really should check out Marineman. It's a great all-ages read, so I really recommend that you check it out. Without further ado, we have Ian Churchill. Ian, how are you?
Hey. Hi.
Why is this not going? There we go. Okay, I was trying to get you to scroll up.
It is working, yeah?
Yes. Yeah, okay. You cut out for a second there. I was like, oh no, we have no audio. So how is it across the pond?
Today has been pretty windy and rainy, as you would expect in England. But it's been great, and we've had some sunshine. I tend to try and go swimming in the sea every day, but I didn't manage to do it today because the waves were too big, the swell was too big. Getting in would have been a real problem because there was a big old suck as they went out, and then they were crashing in, and it's a pebble beach, so you have to be really careful because if you catch it at the wrong time, that sends a shower of pebbles against you, and you can really bruise yourself and get nastily hit. So
how much do you usually swim?
Sorry?
How far do you usually swim?
Well, it's cold water. It's probably about 15 degrees at the moment. It might be different with American.
You're Celsius, where we're Fahrenheit, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. So 15 degrees Celsius, and so it's pretty cold. It takes about 10 minutes to fully acclimatize, and then you suddenly feel warm because you're so numb. You can't feel the cold, and so you can swim around for about a good half an hour before you start to feel a little bit cold and have to get out. So I try and do that every day, just to basically get some exercise, because being a comic book artist, you spend most of your time sort of like sitting there going, like that. So it's always good to try and get out and get some fresh air. Like I say today, I haven't managed it, but sorry?
Probably also good to strengthen your back and your neck because leaning over on a table all the time.
Totally. I mean, it's that actually is one thing that I do worry about, because I had about a year where I couldn't do any work. I think it was last year or the year before. I woke up one morning and I had a prolapse disc in my neck, just about there apparently. And
C5.
C5, C6 it was, so they said. It sent like a lightning pain right way down my right arm into my fingers. I had tingling in my fingers, and it was just like a constant thing. And I had to go and have some regular physiotherapy. Eventually it went away, but it took the best part of a year. So I'm trying to stay moving all the time wherever I can, at least once a day, exercise-wise, just to try and prevent that from happening again.
I was talking to Scott Hanna, and he said there was some special chair that he uses that helps with his back alignment and everything. And then he also recommended the way you could possibly angle your table. I don't know if you're aware of that chair, but if you're not, I could try to get the name and send it to you.
Well, I'll try anything, but what I have done is I tend to work standing up now rather than sitting down. I'm sitting down talking to you in front of my drawing board, but it's the way it's worked out of recent times. If I'm doing commissions and stuff, I'll sit at the drawing board and do them, because that's the traditional way of doing stuff. But more and more, I've been working digitally, so I've customized a chest of IKEA drawers and just sort of like modified it slightly at the top to take my iPad and the chargers and all that sort of stuff. So I tend to sort of stand up.
So now that you're into digital, I mean, do you enjoy digital more, or than traditional pencils? Do you like them evenly, or?
Pretty well. They're both very different. I think for convenience sake and speed, I think the digital way is certainly the better option. I've not got a Cintiq or anything like that, and you see all these people online saying, "Oh, I couldn't possibly do it without the Cintiq," and that's absolute nonsense. All I have is an iPad, first generation iPad Pro,
Oh, wow.
with Procreate, and that's all I need. And I can and Norm Ratman, he's always cursing. He whenever he talks to me, he goes, "Curse that iPad Pro," because I ink my own stuff on the iPad Pro.
And that's when you send them the candy, right?
Yeah, keep it sweet. Yeah, exactly.
Butter them up a little bit.
Exactly, but I really enjoy working digitally for a number of reasons. One is because as I'm getting older, my eyesight's not what it was. And working traditionally, to get proportions right, I have to get off the chair, stand back a few feet, make sure it looks, because of the size of the page, obviously, and then go back to it. And when I do that these days, it means I've got to take off my spectacles for drawing, put on another pair for distance while I go back and check it, and then come back to the drawing mat, and so back and forth, back and forth. But when you're working digitally on, with the iPad, you can just pinch in and out to get proportions right.
Right.
The other thing I really like about digital is you don't have to worry about the temperature of your body or anything like that. When you work traditionally, if let's say you've gone for a brisk walk and you're warm and you've got a bit of a sweat on your brow and stuff, and you come back and you try to do some work, A, you've got adrenaline going through your body, and B, because your hand gets so warm, it makes the paper kind of bevel up, and you have to give it a good 20 minutes, half an hour to calm yourself down before you can start drawing again. Whereas with the iPad Pro, it doesn't. I've got one of those gloves that,
I've seen, inkers like to use them a lot too, and you don't smudge and you don't smear, and
no smudge, and it doesn't pick up any. You can't make the surface of the iPad sort of like go with the heat from your body. So there are very many reasons why I do like the iPad Pro for drawing. Nothing beats doing it traditionally. If you've got the time and stuff, that's great fun. But for just pure convenience sake and speed and deadlines, I find it much easier going digital these days.
Well, I have to tell you, as far as your pencils, I mean, you're one of my all-time favorites, and we talked about this. You drew on one of my jams, and you drew Megan from Excalibur, and these are small, like 4-inch pencil figures.
Yeah, it was tiny.
Yeah, and the detail you did on her face.
Somebody laid that out for you, didn't it? Who laid that out?
Jason Metcalf does all my layouts for me.
Yeah. It was well laid out, I must admit, and that.
Yeah, he's awesome.
That particular pose, I know initially you wanted another character, but it just lent itself. So that's why I dropped it.
Oh, I was fine with whatever you wanted to draw. Just to get you on a jam, to me, was like priceless. It was golden, and the detail on her eyes was so. I mean, it was incredible. The pencils are so tight, and the eyes are so small, and. I mean, you're telling me you're having issues with eyesight, but you did not have issues with eyesight when you drew that. It looked amazing. I should pull it off.
I appreciate you saying that, but I do have issues with my eyesight. I was just going to try and find a pair of my glasses. Oh, okay.
Well, again, my thanks for an amazing job on that jam.
You're welcome. I've got about 4 pairs exactly the same, and so. If I'm drawing up close, I'm wearing these, and I take them off, and I have to get back and put the other pair on, and then go back forward and take them off and put them back, and it's a real pain. So
you're pulling a Clark Kent every time.
Yeah.
Clark Kent to Superman.
I suppose it's exercise.
Yeah. Fair enough. So, I mean, you've been doing this for many years now, and obviously you've been on major titles, which we'll go into. But what inspired you to become an artist to begin with?
Oh, Marvel Comics, probably. When I was a kid, I used to draw all the time. I used to love drawing. And my gran, she bought me a Marvel Man annual when I was a kid, one of the old 1950s things. And I liked the colours on the front. It was from a jumble sale. And I think shortly after that, somebody bought me a Mighty World of Marvel comic. I think it might have been my mum. And I really enjoyed looking at the pictures. I wasn't that good at reading at the time. And I guess it was the bright colours and just the look of things, you know, the look of the heroes and stuff. That's what really got me into drawing into wanting to draw comics, because eventually the penny dropped, and I knew that somebody actually had to draw this stuff. And because when you're a kid, you read a comic and you're aware you're reading it, but when you remember back to reading it, you think of it like a movie, or I did, you know, in my head. It's like I remember stories I've read when I was a kid, and I see them in my head as like a TV show or a movie, rather than panels and dialogue balloons. I don't remember it like that. I remember it as a story that I saw, you know, like watching a movie. So that's probably what first sort of brought comics to my attention. And then as I grew older, I started to recognize different art styles, I suppose. The one that really impacted me first was John Romita Sr. I've always loved his stuff. And probably because that was my first real sort of introduction to comic book art, I'd say. And then after that, it would have been John Byrne, because John Byrne,
big John Byrne fan, yes.
He was amazing. I mean, he still is amazing. He's still, you know, hell of a lot better than a lot of artists out there, even after all this time, I think. But I back in the sort of like mid to late 70s, early 80s, he was just like an artistic god, I thought. And I'd follow anything I could find of his. Obviously, the X-Men stuff with Chris Claremont. But I'd seek out all the Doomsday +1 stuff and everything else that he did, the Space 1999, the Charlton stuff. Loved all his stuff, and then Rog 2000 as well. Is it Rog 2000 or Rog 2000? I'm not precisely sure how you pronounce it, but I used to like that. He just had a sort of style that really appealed to me. I've always liked what I call pretty art. You know, there's some artists that are a little bit more visceral with their strokes and stuff, but and there are other artists who are more meticulous, and Byrne's one of those more meticulous pencilers, I think. Arthur Adams is the same, you know, very meticulous pencils. It's pretty art, what I consider pretty art. I would say, conversely, someone like Frank Miller isn't pretty art. It's more sort of, but it's got a lot of energy. You know, so there's obviously no right way or wrong way, but I've always gravitated more towards the prettier sort of like drawn pieces.
Well, that explains your style then.
Yeah, probably does. Actually, that's whether it's conscious or unconscious influence. That's sort of channeled the way that I've gone. Channeled the way I've drawn over the years, I suppose.
By the way, I'm going to warn you, Norm is in the room.
Is he?
Yeah, he said,
I love Norm. I know.
Ian with glasses turns him into Richard Starkings.
Where's my cup of tea?
We were talking about you, Norm. Now I know why you praise Ian so much and you like him. He told me he gets you some candy.
He likes all the British candy, you know.
Dell's in the room. Hey, Dell. He wants to ask you, what's your next project, or which are you working on right now?
At the moment, I'm doing covers for a line of history graphic novels, which I can't really say which ones I'm working on at the moment because they haven't been announced yet. But so far, there's been Abraham Lincoln, Martin Luther King Jr., a whole bunch of other ones, and I've had a really good time doing them. So that's currently what I'm working on at the moment. I've also been talking to Jonathan Ross again about maybe doing something else with him, presumably at Image, and that's pretty much what I'm on at the moment.
We were going to talk about it later on, but since he brought it up, you have your creator-owned image book, Marineman, and Volume 1 has been out, and you plan on doing a follow-up at some point, right?
Yeah, that's true.
Can you tell us about that? What inspired you to write that? Because now you're doing writing chores. You were doing writing chores. What inspired that story from you?
Okay. Well, Marineman, was one of those things. It's one of those characters that just wouldn't go away with me, and it's a character I created when I was 8 years old, and I used to watch all these underwater documentaries with my granddad, and the word marine just kept coming up and stuck in my head. Obviously, I was into superheroes. I loved superheroes, and I loved comics. And around this time, my dad said to me, "You're never going to get anywhere if you don't start creating your own characters." Because up till then, all I've been doing was drawing Spider-Man or Superman or the X-Men or whatever it was. Badly, but I've been drawing them. I've been practicing and
Not
doing
badly.
and then and he said, you're not going to get anywhere unless you start doing your own stuff. And I took that to heart. So I created this character, and originally he was a mishmash of Marvel's Submariner and DC's Aquaman, and costume-wise and backstory-wise, he was pretty much identical. But over the years, I kind of, and as I grew up, I realised it couldn't be like that. It had to be different. It had to be its own entity. And I kind of, revised it, year after year, and then put it away for a bit. But like I said, it was one of those ones that I had to keep coming back to because it just wouldn't stay away. And then, obviously, I'm like Norm said, I'm good friends with Richard Starkings, and Richard Starkings had been doing the Elephant Men at Image and had nothing but great things to say about creator-owned comics, and it was very encouraging. I kind of, like I say, it's something I'd always wanted to do, and Richard kind of really sort of was instrumental in pushing me forward to take the bull by the horns and give it a go. Like you said, writing for the first time. I'd been offered writing gigs up until then, but not very many. Because it's, I do like writing, and I think I'm okay at it, but obviously I'm more of a penciler, and that's my comfort zone. Richard was, like I say, very encouraging, and I kind of just had to do it. I'm pretty good friends with Eric Stevenson at Image, and he said that they'd publish it if I were to go ahead and do it. And Richard very graciously lettered it for me, or Comicraft, and it worked out really well. I should probably point out that prior to doing Marineman, I'd worked on Red Hulk with Jeff Loeb at Marvel, and I should probably go into Okay, so I'd had some shoulder trouble, and I hadn't been able to draw for the best part of a year, something like that. And I was a little bit hesitant about starting to get back onto a mainstream book because, I didn't know how I was going to fare. And Jeff needed somebody to draw the Code Red arc. Ed needed a break. Jeff was in London. Called me over up to London and said, "I'm working on Red Hulk, and Arthur Adams has drawn loads of pages. Look at these." And he showed me these gorgeous Arthur Adams pages. And I was like, "Oh, I want to do that." And he said, "You've got to come and do it. Got to come and do the story for me." And I was really, really hesitant, but he dissuaded me. So I agreed to do it, and I drew the first page in the style that everybody's accustomed to seeing, the 90s sort of very detailed stuff. And it was really hurting my shoulder. So we all agreed that because I draw naturally in a very cartoony way, kind of like Disney on steroids is how I think. And I'm quick at drawing like that, and it's less stress on the shoulder because it's more sweeping movements rather than. So anyway, like I say, I drew the first page in the usual way, and it was hurting my shoulder. And then Mark Panici, the editor, and Jeff both agreed that if I could hit the deadlines doing it in a way that wasn't going to hurt my shoulder, then they were perfectly happy for that. So it was a far more cartoony style. Anyway, that opened the door for me to draw like that, and it was accepted rather well on that particular story arc. And
well, Ed McGuinness also has kind of a cartoony style to him, so it just fit perfectly to go from Ed to you.
It did. It fit perfectly, but it also gave me the confidence to draw like that from that point onwards, if and when I had the opportunity to. And Marineman, I always saw in a more cartoony style anyway, because it's got a certain charm about it, and I felt that would suit the overall tone of the book. So working with Jeff on Code Red, I saved the money that I'd made on that, and used that to finance Marineman. And that worked out really well. Financially, it wasn't going to break any records because creator-owned stuff, you've really got to, hit the current, the trend for it to pick up,
Zombies or Kirkman.
Like Zombies or Kirkman, yeah. I never expected to set the sales charts alight with it or anything, because traditionally underwater properties never do they?
Right.
The amount of times Aquaman and the Submariner have been cancelled and rebooted and cancelled and rebooted. You know
what though? Jeff Johns had rebooted Aquaman and did a phenomenal job with that. So with good writing, I think they could.
Oh, yeah. Totally. But traditionally it's always turned out to be short-lived. Everybody wants to underwater characters, and they want to support them, but eventually they seem to run out of steam somewhere along the line, it would seem. So I never expected it to be like a massive hit, but I hoped it would break even. It broke even, but it didn't really make enough for me to carry on doing it on an ongoing basis. So like you said earlier, I am working on volume 2, but it's been very slow because
Jacob wanted to know when we would be seeing Marineman again.
As soon as I can get it to you, brother. I mean, it's just one of those things. I have to fit it around paid work, and if I've got paid work, I have to prioritize that because I've got bills to pay.
He said it was a fun comic, and he loved it. By the way,
thank you very much. I really enjoyed doing it, and I am working on it. I've laid out the entirety of volume 2, and I've penciled and inked issue 1. And I'm working on issue 2 of volume 2 at the moment. But it's like I say, it's one of those things. I just have to do it as and when I can. It will get done. I just can't say when it's going to get done. And of course I have to do some of the colouring as well.
So you do. That's right. You did the colouring on that too. The writing chores, the pencils.
Volume 1, I wrote it and drew it and partially coloured it. I coloured most of issue 1, and then a very talented colourist called Alex Salazzo from Australia I'd seen some of the stuff he'd done online and contacted him, and he agreed to help me do Marineman. He did the lion's share of volume 1 of Marineman. I went over it and made it look the way I wanted it to look, insofar as just a little bit of polish here and there and adjustments of colours and stuff. But
Gotcha.
but the majority of the colouring Alex did. And I've worked with him since then as well, on some covers for DC and some stuff and some interiors as well. Because I think he's fantastic. He does a really, really good job. He's got a good eye for colour.
Jacob had asked if you thought about doing crowdfunding for it. You know, that's the big thing right now.
I have thought about it, and it's one of these things, isn't it? There's nothing wrong with Kickstarter or the other
Indiegogo
crowdfunding platforms. Yeah, I don't have a problem with them, but in my own head, and they've become more prevalent over the last few years, obviously, as well. In my head, I feel that if you've got enough belief in a character or a creation of your own, it should sink or swim, no pun intended, sink or swim on its own merits. So I feel like I've got to finance it myself, put it out there, and if it does well, then that vindicates it. And if it doesn't, then that's the public at large telling you maybe that's not the best idea. Whereas I could crowdfund it, I suppose.
Well, you know, you and I discussed.
There's no real gauge about whether it worked or not. It's a niche audience.
Well, you and I discussed about marketing possibly being the issue, because you have a large, following, and you have obviously an amazing resume. But at the time period you were doing it for Image, I think there was a lull in Image and indie comics.
Yeah.
But indie is big again, but indie is big again. And I really think that just as long as you got enough eyes on it and enough exposure through marketing, I think it would be a rousing success. Based on your followers, based on your talent, and obviously based on a quality story. So, I mean, by no means am I your business agent, but this is the time to do the crowdfunding and get it out there, because I think for you it's just exposure, because you have a lot of people that love your work. So
yeah, I mean, I would consider it again. It's just from my standpoint, that's how I used to think. But these platforms have evolved over the last few years, so it's not something I would dismiss out of hand.
By the way, Jacob, you said you have a lovely accent. You're from Jersey.
I've never been to Jersey. I've been to Guernsey, which is one of the sister islands in the Channel Islands. But no, I'm not. I'm from the south coast of England. But thank you. That's very kind of you to say that I've got a nice accent.
Del wanted to ask you,
where were we, by the way? Are we Marineman? Oh, one of the other things I was hoping for as well, when it first was published, I went to San Diego and did a big push over there at the show, and it was looking good, at that point. We sold out all the books at the show that we had at the show, and that was the first time I'd seen it in real life, so to speak, because it had been published, and I had all the copies sent directly to the convention center. So that when I got there, it was the first time I'd ever seen it. And luckily, I didn't want to open the box because I didn't want to see whether it had printed badly or not. And I got my wife to open the box, and I said, what does it look like? And she said,
how was it to see the book in print and know that this is yours? You created this,
It was amazing. It was all the stuff that Richard had told me about the Elephant Men. It was true. Everything that he'd told me, how he felt. I suddenly understood what he meant, and I had Dave Gibbons did an introduction for me on volume 1, very graciously. I met him at a show. I'd never met him before, and told him what I was doing, and I said, I'll hit you up for an introduction if you don't mind, and he blew me away when he said yes. So that was terrific. Rob even came over and said, "I love Marine Man. Marine Man's great." Yeah, which really surprised me at the time. I was sitting there drawing and or sketching and stuff, and love Marine Man. And then Jonathan Ross did the same thing. It did the same show. I was drawing, and he came over, and I heard Marine Man. I love Marine Man. And I thought, that sounds familiar, that voice, because he's big on TV over here. And I looked up, and it's Jonathan. He's going, "How you doing?" "Hi, Jonathan." And that's how I first met him. And Marine Man, there were a couple of people that were interested as far as TV shows when it came out, but
really?
Never happened. Never came to anything. And then just recently, it almost got optioned for a movie deal, but it didn't quite happen. It was something I was really excited about, and I was hoping it would happen because, that would probably give me some sort of revenue stream that I could plow into Volume 2 and sort of like push ahead with that. But it didn't happen in the end, unfortunately.
Well, what makes Marine Man different than the other archetypes?
The other, quite a few things, really. Number one, he's not really a superhero. He's a TV presenter that does underwater documentaries. It just happens that he can breathe underwater. Nobody knows this, and it's revealed during the course of the series. More specifically, I think in the early part of the series, and he's been led to believe certain things about himself all his life, and it turns out that majority of them aren't true. And it's a lot of fun. It's he doesn't come from Atlantis. There is an Atlantis, or there was an Atlantis, but it's just a ruined city under the water somewhere, which he's found over the course of. Because if you had those powers, if you could breathe underwater, the whole world is your playground. You could go and do whatever you want to. You could, if you're a human that could breathe underwater, see underwater, you don't feel the cold. You can go as deep as the deepest part of the ocean. Unlimited food sources, as long as you don't mind sort of like biting into the neck of a fish. You're completely self-sustainable, aren't you? You could do whatever you wanted to do. And his mother was a marine archaeologist, and during the course of this, I'm not going to spoil it for you, but during the course of the story, during his childhood, she died. And one of the things that she always wanted to do was find Atlantis. So he takes that as his own personal mission, as an aside from everything else that's going on in the story, to go and find Atlantis, the real Atlantis. And it's just a ruined city underwater. So there's no water-breathing Atlanteans swimming around with futuristic technology. So there's none of that in Marine Man.
And this is pretty much a family-friendly book. You can read with
absolutely.
your kids. And, yeah.
It's one of those things. When I was a kid and I was growing up, the majority of the books I'd read were Stan Lee and Jack Kirby books, or Stan Lee and Steve Ditko books, and they were never specifically touted as being all ages, but retrospectively, that's what they were. Anyone of any age can pick up one of those books, not be offended by anything that happens in it.
Agreed.
But have a really good time reading it. And I wanted to do something that was similar to that. Unconsciously, I may have had a similar writing style, perhaps, to Jeff Loeb, because I'd worked with him so much.
Okay. Did you get any influences? Anyone help you with the writing chores, like to give you advice or anything, or you just jumped in and wrote?
Just jumped in feet first. Another no pun intended. I just jumped in feet first and gave it my best shot. And I fully expected to get all the trolls and everybody saying, "Oh, Churchill can't write," and all this sort of stuff. And it didn't happen. I was blown away when people actually really enjoyed the book. Anyone that's read it loves it, but like you say, it's getting people to read it, getting people to discover it and find it and give it a shot. But I fully stand by it. It's an all ages book. It's an art style that I'm very happy to draw in. I think the volume 2 I've kept in that same style. It's maybe slightly more chiseled edges to it, but not much. It's mostly the same sort of overly pumped up balloon-like characters, let's say.
But that's stylistically, it probably matches the tone of the book anyway. And I like both styles.
Thank you, and that is the thing. It's picking the most appropriate style for any given project that you're working on. You know,
right.
when I was working on Revenge with Jonathan, that wouldn't my cartoony style, and there's no way that it was suited that. That
right.
was so X-rated, and it had to have a much more
edgier, right?
Edgier, more realistic style. The same could be said for the Further Adventures of Nick Wilson, which I did with Eddie Gorodetsky and Mark and Draco. I only did one issue. I think Steve Sadowski did the majority of the book, and they asked me to do one issue, and it was actually a really fun issue to draw because it employed a lot of different art styles because of the nature of the story in that particular issue. The main thrust of the issue was a very realistic kind of style, high contrast, fine line work.
But that shows your versatility to be able to draw all these different styles. You know, a lot of artists can't do that.
Yeah, I disagree. I disagree slightly. I think most artists worth their salt can do that, but very rarely are given the opportunity to do that. And also once you become known for a certain art style,
I see.
That's what your readership wants. You know, it's only because I hurt my shoulder that I had the option to present 2 art styles to the readership, and you know it's kind of snowballed from there. But on this particular issue, there were elements of flashbacks. And one was in a Will Eisner style, so I got to draw in a Will Eisner style.
Oh, cool! Which
was really cool, actually. I really enjoyed doing that. And then there was another flashback which had to be drawn in a Dan DeCarlo style. So I got to do all these different styles, sort of in and amongst and surrounding the main narrative, which I was drawing in this very realistic style. So it was creative.
Did you go to those for references, though? Like, did you look at their work for references?
Yeah, I made sure I had lots of reference around so that I was on point with it. But I really enjoyed doing it, you know, and that was all on the iPad as well. So I could put some washes and grayscale and do all that sort of stuff that
nice.
where it was needed, and had a really good time doing that.
A lot of people don't realize that you're a scuba diver. They don't know that. I didn't know that until talking to you. And so you have hands-on research as far as being underwater. I don't think you grabbed any fish and bit into them, but you know.
Yeah, no, I do. I love scuba diving, and I've taken lots of photos underwater, which I've used as reference for Marine Man. I should probably give a shout out to Matt Dunford if he tunes in. He's fairly well credited as being Marine Man's #1 fan. So
okay,
if he tunes in, hi Matt. But he's been a big proponent over the years for pushing Marine Man forward to everyone that he meets. So I've really appreciated that.
Were you nervous doing the writing? I mean, like, this is your first time writing published, and you know you're not known as a writer. Were you nervous? Were you excited? Were you up to the challenge?
I was more excited than anything. Probably my naivety. You know, I just kind of thought I was up to it. Yeah, maybe that's ego, maybe it's overconfidence, maybe it's slightly arrogant. I don't know. But
did you have an editor with Image, or are you on your own with that?
No, I did it all myself.
Wow!
Couldn't afford an editor.
So proof it and get it right yourself.
Yeah, get it right yourself. But you know, I would imagine over the years reading comics, the influences. You know, Stan Lee. There was probably some Stan Lee in there. I'm pretty sure there was some Jeff Loeb there. just the writers that I've read over the years. There's no way you can't read that amount of stories growing up and not have some of it sort of like stay in your head.
Right.
And reading comics as an adult as well, it's got to lodge in there to some degree. Whether it's consciously or unconsciously. And I think some of my phrasing was probably very similar to Jeff's. Looking back on it, a lot of it was my own. A lot of it was my, forging my own way ahead and stuff. But I probably was a little bit nervous at the time. I don't recall being overly nervous about it.
That's good.
It's something I wanted to do, and over the years since then, I have been offered writing gigs at DC, but I've always felt I've really got to know the character well, personally.
Right.
Marineman was my own character, and I was the only one that knew how he thought and how it should be presented to the world. So from that standpoint, I guess I was pretty confident in my own ability. But when you're taking other people's characters, I guess it's kind of like Marineman, I knew back to front. If I take a character, let's say at DC, you've got all the jigsaw pieces, which makes it easier, and you just have to find a narrative to hang the jigsaw pieces around to make a compelling story for someone, I would imagine. But I'm not as familiar with the DC characters, let's say, or some of the Marvel characters. So I would probably approach it in a different way.
Well, this was your baby since 8 years old, and the natural progression of the character was going on in your mind over all those years. So I would imagine writing about it was like writing about yourself or an old friend. So that helps.
Yeah, certainly to a degree. And I found it fun putting myself in different characters' heads and trying to think differently to the way that I think, because you have
how they would react in a situation,
yes.
How they would.
Precisely, you've got to have that conflict and that difference of opinion between characters.
Well, just come to America because we have a lot of that going on. you have a lot of great character study. A lot of great character study. By the way, my mother said to say hello, and she said, I'm sorry, I have to do this. My daughters say, I love you, Daddy, so forgive my unprofessionalism. I love you too.
That's so cute.
Carlos said to say hello. He's a Brazilian artist. He's very talented.
Hi, Carlos.
Del, I wanted to ask you, and then this is going to get us into the Marvel and DC. You've been in the game for a while, so what motivates you to continue doing this? Does it bring you back to your childhood, or is it because you enjoy do you bring joy to many people who look at your work?
Why I keep doing it, I enjoy it. I love comics. I've always loved comics. I think maybe it's because of the time I was born and when I grew up. It's kind of, I think it was probably superheroes that got me into comics. And because of that, I've always loved comics. I think these days, if you like superheroes, you can get the fix elsewhere. So it doesn't necessarily lead into comics.
Right.
Heroes, you can watch them in movies, you can watch them on TV, far more outlets than I had when I was a kid. I mean, there was Superman the movie, the Wonder Woman TV show, your options were severely limited. So for me, comics became a love, and they've continued to be so over the years. I still read them now, as and when I get the time. So I just love the job, really. Sometimes it feels like a job, but the majority of the time it doesn't. I'm just very lucky to be doing something that I really enjoy and that I love. I love going to conventions and getting feedback from the people that have read the stories that I've contributed to. And that's something that's a bit concerning, because with the whole pandemic at the moment, there's no conventions, and that's really changed things. I used to look forward to going to a few conventions a year and interacting with fans on a face-to-face basis.
Absolutely. And seeing your peers. You get to see your peers at shows.
Yeah, exactly, absolutely. I'd occasionally bump into Norm. I don't know if he's still watching, but it's always great hanging out with Norm. And over here, being in England, there are a couple of decently sized shows during the year, and that's when you get to meet your peers, and you get used to seeing everybody every year, and then suddenly, just like that, it's gone. So. Yeah,
We'll get back there.
Yeah, I'm sure we will. It's not going to last forever. It'll take a while to get back to so-called normality, but it is what it is. I'm looking forward.
It'll take a while for you to get back to norm. The norm.
I'll get.
Here's a pun for you.
Get it underway for him. Oh,
oh.
Sorry about that. I just accidentally hit the gas thing on my chair, and my chair went.
Del asked. He wants to ask okay, let me ask the elephant in the room. Who wins a fight, Marine Man, Aquaman, or Submariner?
Marine Man, obviously. I think hands down, actually. Yeah. Submariner and Aquaman are pretty strong, but Marine Man, you take them with his arms behind his back.
So how did you get your break into the industry?
I was just very lucky. I was very, very lucky, in the right place at the right time. Having said that, I put myself in the right place at the right time. To give you a bit of history, I went from school. I'd always loved comics, always loved drawing comics, and I was convinced that was what I was going to do as a living. And I got to 16 and I left school, and suddenly it hadn't happened. And I'd sent some stuff off to the Marvel tryout book. You remember the first Marvel tryout book?
I do.
And I didn't win. That was Mark Bagley that won that. But I gave it a shot. I would have been about 14, I think, when I sent that off. And so nothing since then. And then I got 16. I had to leave school. Didn't want to go to college. And I got an apprenticeship at a graphic design studio. So from 16 till about, I think, 22, 23, something like that, I was a graphic designer. I started off as a very junior graphic designer, and I was a senior designer by the time I got into comics. And just before I got into comics, there was a big recession over here, and I got made redundant. At that time I was designing tourist t-shirts, actually, and drawing cartoons for tourist t-shirts. Anyway,
starving artist in its form.
Sorry, what was that?
The starving artist in its cliche form.
That's precisely what it was. Yeah, but I really enjoyed it. I got quite proficient with the computer at the time, and this was like early 90s. This was like 1991, 92, something like that. It's around that sort of era. So, because when I first got into graphic design, it was still, you had to mark things up for type. You get it taken to the typesetter. You have to chop it up with a scalpel and put wax on the back to put it, all that sort of stuff. And,
wow.
And rostrum cameras for making things bigger and smaller, and it was all like that. And Richard Starkings is a similar background. So we constantly reminisce about having to change the chemicals for the baths to develop stuff, and then the computer started to come in. So when I was at this t-shirt place, I got to use computers for the first time for design, which was good. But I think working in design gave me a real foundation, let's say, for how important deadlines are. Because a lot of people who get into comics have never had to work to a deadline and find it difficult to stick to deadlines.
Tough deadlines, yeah.
And generally speaking, from my experience, Marvel and DC deadlines are never long. They're always really short deadlines. So anyway, I had a background with graphic design. I was laid off, and there was a convention in London. It was the last of the UK comic art conventions, I think. It was the very last one. And I decided to give it a go. It was actually an episode of Star Trek, The Next Generation, that made me go and give it a go. There was an episode. Oh, this is it. Yeah. So I'd been to an interview and for another graphic design job, and tentatively had been offered it, and I could have taken that, or I could go to London to this show and try and get into comics. And I'd watched an episode of Star Trek called Tapestry, and it's an episode where Captain Picard has got like a replacement heart valve or something like that. And it happened because he got stabbed in the back by a Nautican when he was a kid. And something happens on an away mission, and he dies. And Q turns up and says, if you could go back, would you do things differently? And he said, oh, yes, I'd do things much, much more differently because I was a different person back then. And so Q sends Picard back. And to cut a long story short, he changes his activities in the instrumental parts of when he got stabbed and ends up on the Enterprise, but this time he's an ensign rather than the captain. And he's having a chat with Riker, who is still Commander Riker. And he's frustrated because he's not in command. And Riker says, you've always played it safe. You've never taken chances. So he never took the chance and took control of the bridge on the Stargazer. He never did what he did to become captain.
Right.
Never took a risk. And he didn't like it. He didn't like being the ensign on the Enterprise. He wanted to be the captain again. So Q gives him another chance, and he goes back again. And this time he does everything exactly the same. And flash forward, becomes captain of the Enterprise. And I just watched that and thought to myself, well, I've got to take a risk. You know, I was, 22? Something like 22, 23. And I thought, well, you know, that's the way forward. So I had this job offer on one hand and the unknown uncertainty of going up to the show, and decided to go up to the show. I'd written and drawn 4 pages of a Captain America story just out of my head a few days before.
So you wrote it too? Oh, wow, okay.
Yeah, I didn't have anything to show. I didn't have a script to go from, so I had to do it all myself. I had the presence of mind to do storytelling pages. That's one thing I did know from reading interviews with professionals, you know, in things like comic reading and stuff like that. I knew that you had to show progressive storytelling ability. So I took that up and I went to this show. And I went, as I first went in, there was, I can't even remember who it was now, but there was a small press place, and I went over and showed them my stuff, and they loved it, and they said, you know, we'll give you some work, blah, blah, blah. I thought, thanks very much, and we exchanged details, I think. And then I went further into the show, and that's where all the, you know, big companies were. And there was a guy that was reviewing portfolios, and I didn't know who he was. And I stood at the sidelines and watched him review people, you know, as a preliminary thing, just to see what he was saying. And what the stuff that he was saying made a lot of sense to me. So I got in his line, and I was just chatting to the kid in front of me. And we were both saying, well, no one ever gets discovered at shows. And this guy was saying, well, Jim Lee got discovered at a show. I said, did he? And he said, yeah. And we were having this big conversation. And then it came to this guy's turn at the table. And Bob, the guy that was reviewing the artwork, looked at it, and he wasn't successful. And then it was my turn. I went up and showed my stuff. And he went quiet and thoughtful, and he looked up at me and he said, are you getting any work? And I said, no, not at the moment. He said, well, I think I might be able to help you out with that. Have you got any copies? And I didn't have any copies. I just had the originals with me. So I said, I'll be back. I'll go and get some. So I went running across the road, trying to find somewhere where I could do photocopies.
Because back then it wasn't as easy, right? There's no Kinko's.
No. And there was a student union across the road, and they happened to have a photocopier. So I was running off these photocopies, at the same time trying to find a payphone to tell my brother, what had happened, because there's no mobile phones or anything, or cell phones. So, and I had the presence of mind to write my name and address and all that sort of stuff and telephone number on the back, and went back and gave them to him and forgot to ask who he was. So I was thinking, job done. I've done it. I've given him the stuff. I'm going to get some work, hopefully. And I went outside, got myself a beer, sat on the wall, and enjoyed the sunshine. And as it would happen, he came out and walked past me. So I saw him go past, and I tapped him on the shoulder and asked who he was. And he said he's Bob Harris, and he's the editor of the X-Men in America. So I put myself in the right place. I took a chance, and my art then was not great. I mean, he obviously saw something in my ability.
Well, your sequentials, he probably liked your storytelling ability, the energy and the.
Because the actual execution, it was pretty horrendous. But
every artist says that.
Well, no, in my case, it actually probably was true. So he took it back to New York and got in contact. They sent me a fake assignment first to see if I could hit the deadline. And obviously, because I had my experience in graphic design, that wasn't a problem. And so after I hit the fake deadline, they gave me some work. And the first work I had was a Beast backup strip in an X-Men annual written by Scott Lobdell. And I never looked back after that. There was a dry patch just after that, and I was going to New York with my brother for a vacation, and I thought I'd best do some more samples just as a precaution. And I did some more Marvel samples, and I did a handful of DC samples just in case it didn't work out at either one, So I went to Marvel first because I had an in there, and went up and managed to secure some more work. I think the next thing after that was probably Deadpool. I think it might have been. It might have been something else, but I'm pretty sure it was. It was Suzanne Gaffney was the editor, and I hadn't even made an appointment. I just showed up at the Marvel offices, and they don't normally let you in if you haven't made an appointment, or they didn't then. And I quoted Bob's name, and they let me up, and he was there, and I said hello. And I got shuffled along to Suzanne's office, and I was sitting there, just, fingers crossed and hoping to get some work. And she had some pages strewn across her desk, and it was Carlos Pacheco stuff from.
I love his art too. Yeah.
It was from the Bishop miniseries.
Yeah.
I think that was one of his first gigs, I think, and that was sitting there, and I was thinking, well, that's pretty good. That's damn sight better than me. And then she sort of said, well, we've got this Deadpool thing. Do you want to do that? And I said, yeah, okay, that's great. So I don't quote me, but I think that's how it happened. That's how I remember it happening.
I just remember seeing you drew Wolverine and Cyclops in the X-Men. I mean, like I had the stuff you had done before that, but I wasn't really paying attention to artists, writers, really. I was just enjoying what I was enjoying. But when I saw that Wolverine and that Cyclops, I was like, oh my God.
This is the 2000 sort of Uncanny X-Men, is that?
It was right. Yeah, it was right. It was a little before that. No, I saw you with Cable first. Sorry, Cable. I loved your work in Cable. I really loved it.
Cable was my first real proper gig.
Yeah, I loved your work in Cable. That's when I first saw you. And then I saw you draw Wolverine and Cyclops, and your pencils seemed like even tighter on that, like even more 90s, Mark Silvestri kind of, tight. And I was like, oh my God, this guy can just draw everything amazingly. And then I followed you with Supergirl and everything else there. And obviously, your Cable has never been the same since the book you worked on, in my opinion.
Thank you.
But here you are, you're taking Cable and Deadpool in his limited series, and these are characters. McFarlane did that famous cover for Rob Liefeld. Rob Liefeld brings these characters out. Rob draws them, and at the time, they were the sensation. These guys were like the it in the industry. And here you are, a relatively new guy. You're drawing these characters following the footsteps of the major creators and the image guys and these amazing artists. Was there pressure on you to do that? I mean, or was there pressure by yourself or anybody else? And what was the reaction from fans? And
no, not really. I was very lucky. I freely admit that, very lucky. I was right place, right time for all of those things. I was really into Todd's Spider-Man. I remember reading that a lot. The stuff that Rob had done, I wasn't following. So I'd seen his artwork and stuff, but for one reason or another, I loved Todd's stuff because I think mainly because it was very cartoony. And I drew in a very cartoony way. And so prior to getting into comics, I was reading more of that than I was of Rob and Jim stuff. Then when I got my foot in the door and I'd drawn the Beast thing and was put on to Deadpool, Bob said, we were out to dinner one time and I said, how do I get more work? And he said, well, if you drew a bit more like Jim Lee, that would get you some more work. You've got to chisel off all the soft edges that you do. And I took that to heart. So that's what I really tried to do, And so when I got the Deadpool gig, I wasn't overly familiar with Deadpool. I hadn't read Deadpool. I didn't know really who he was.
Which is probably good because then you don't have that pressure and you can be loose when you draw.
It's precisely because of that I didn't have the pressure. Also I was very young. It was just for me, it was just, I can't believe my luck. I've got a professional comics gig. It could have been anything. It could have been, I was just very lucky that it was Deadpool and that Deadpool over the years has progressed and turned into what Deadpool has become,
Right.
It was just being in the right place at the right time. And because I was unfamiliar, like you say, I didn't feel the pressure. There probably was the pressure, but I didn't feel it.
Good.
And that was with Mark Waid, I think it was writing that.
Yeah.
I'd seen Madureira's actually. I'd seen Madureira's first Deadpool mini-series, but I hadn't seen Rob's. So I didn't feel the pressure of Rob at that time.
Joe Bennett is another, big time to follow. So
yeah, but even he was in his formative stages as well.
Right.
So I didn't feel any pressure on that score either. I was just very happy to have the work and did the best job that I could do in the very short time that I had given to me to do it in. And from what I can remember, I actually did miss one deadline on Deadpool, and that because there was a death in the family that
I'm sorry.
Wasn't expecting. But majority of it I hit on time. So and since then, I to my memory, I don't remember ever having missed another deadline. And they've always been really short deadlines. Marvel or DC, they're both the same. Yep. I'd like to tell you this is all meticulously planned out in advance and stuff, but it generally isn't. It's generally the writer probably maybe gets a little bit more time than the artist, but it's thrown to the artist and the artist get it drawn.
So to throw that pun out, just you're thrown in, jump in, and swim.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I'm like a duck. I may look perfectly serene and calm on the top, but underneath my little legs are going.
JE wanted to ask you, and I wanted to ask you. So good job, JE. Any chance of seeing some Marvel or DC variants from you? The variant covers are so big. I'd love to see variants from you.
I'd be happy to if anybody asked me, but nobody's asked me so far. So.
All right, we gotta start a campaign. We want Ian Churchill.
Quite happy to.
That'd be awesome.
Both companies have got characters that I love, and funnily enough, I sometimes prefer the less prominent characters because you can do more with them and reimagine them somewhat.
Well, that's funny because you went over to Supergirl in DC, and she was a problematic character. She had a lot of issues going on.
Yeah, I loved working on Supergirl. Again, that was with Jeff, and I've always had a great working relationship with Jeff.
I enjoyed that run.
I did. What happened was Mike Turner had just done the first story arc with Jeff of Supergirl.
Right.
And DC wanted it to become an ongoing thing. And Jeff said, I'll do it if you will, to me. Because he thought that I could draw in a similar style to Mike if I wanted to. So I very consciously tried to ape Mike a bit on Supergirl, mostly to keep the momentum going from that first arc and keep it consistent, From my own personal point of view, I thought she was a bit thin. And during the course of my tenure on the book, I made her look like she'd eaten a sandwich or two. So by the time I left, I think she was looking a little bit more nourished.
So we should have started the campaign, give Supergirl a sandwich. But if I want ribs, I'll go to Tony Roma's.
Again, it was one of these things, I wasn't over familiar with the character. I'd read a couple of Supergirl stories over the years, but nothing to speak of. So I didn't really have that pressure because I hadn't seen anything apart from what Mike had just done prior to that. So I just went in with, wide-eyed and bushy-tailed and trusted that Jeff knew what he was doing and just doing the best I could, again, within the time frame that I had to draw it. I always cite John Romita Jr.'s little phrase. Whenever people have asked him before about his style, he always says his style is whatever gets him to the deadline on time.
Yeah.
And I can really relate to that. It's something I've always had in the back of my mind. I've got to hit the deadline, and if you got more time, you can make a better job of it. But generally, you don't have more time. You've got to get it done so that it can be produced and get out there to the readers.
Well, I've absolutely loved your art for decades. I mean, you really are one of my favorite all-time artists. So, seriously, I have the Cable run upstairs. I have the Deadpool miniseries. I have Supergirl. I have so much stuff from you. I mean, I can't claim I have everything, but I have so many books that you have illustrated that sometimes I just want to, the ones that aren't worth money, just pull apart and frame stuff. I mean, and Cable had, it was a very weird style for me. Cable was cartoon and it was kind of like tight and edgy at the same time.
Funny you should say that. Cable, I've looked back at my Cable stuff and I've got memories of when I was drawing Cable as well. And when I initially got Cable, it was how was it? I had one issue. Steve Scrose was leaving, and I had that issue when all the X-Men died, and there was like a double-page spread, wasn't there?
I remember well, yeah.
I loved drawing that. That was great fun. Anyway, that was the first time that I'd worked with Jeff, and I had a really good time working on that. But from my perspective, it was just another job. I'd done the Deadpool thing. Cable was my next gig. They'd offered me this Cable issue. I took it, Again, not knowing much about Cable, because I'd never really read the New Mutants or X-Force or anything like that. I'd read some of the earlier New Mutants, the Bob
Right.
McCloud,
Love Bob McCloud too.
and some of the Bill Sienkiewicz stuff, but from then on I kind of fell away from it and drifted back to the X-Men. So I hadn't really read what Rob had been doing on that. So again, I didn't feel the pressure, which was good. I'd done that issue. I felt a little, because I'd seen some of Steve's stuff just prior to taking it on, because I did my research and what have you, and for the costume and what have you. And Steve's stuff was great, so I thought a little bit nervy maybe, but no major sort of like crushing pressure. And so I did that issue with Jeff, and then, as I understand it, the editor at the time, Lisa Patrick, I think it was, she got a call from Jeff, and Jeff said, "Is there any chance we can get this kid to carry on doing it? Because I really like what he did on that issue." So she called me and said, and passed this message on, and I said, "Yeah, more than happy to do it," because I knew that I had to get a full-time ongoing gig, because that was
Sure.
the next part of my plan. It's all very well doing a mini-series, but to make a living doing comics, you have to be doing it every day.
And to build a resume for the future, yeah.
Yeah, and to get better at what you're doing. Because in a lot of ways, I was very fortunate. I learned as I went along. A lot of people these days don't get to learn as they go along. They have to be fully formed going in. But
right.
I got in at a time when they'd pretty much hire anyone that could hold a pencil. So as long as you can get your foot in the door, you could learn as you went along, assuming you were good enough to keep hitting the deadlines and getting the work given to you. So I was more than happy to grab Cable with both hands. And as I went through my years on Cable, I found that I had in the back of my head Bob saying, "Draw like Jim Lee," but at the same time, there was a little voice in my head saying, "Well, this guy's popular, so aim in that direction." And it turned out, at the beginning of Cable, I was still trying to emulate Jim to a certain degree, and then Joe Mad took off, and so my style started getting a little bit more cartoony, which was more natural for me anyway. And while he was ruling the roost on the X-Men, I felt my style drifting more towards that. And then when X-Men artists changed again, it kind of veered back and forth. So it kind of went between my style, my natural style, my more Jim Lee influenced style, and a few influences from whoever was popular at the time. So I can understand why you felt it went through a different sort of like look. And occasionally it was Deadline style as well, because I remember there was one issue. You remember that issue which was predominantly ink? It was black ink everywhere. And I think it was Cable and Domino. They were going through somewhere with pop-up guns coming out and heads on spider legs and stuff.
Oh, yes, I do.
Remember that one? That was all.
Yes, I do. The spider head reminded me. Yeah, the spider head.
I remember at the time we were running so close to the bone with deadlines, and Jeff called me up and he said, "We're quite close to the knuckle on this one. We've got to pull it out of our hats. I'm going to write it all in a dark room. Just throw black ink everywhere." I said, "Okay, I could do that." Trouble is, or especially with the way I draw, even when everything's obscured by black ink, I still have to do all the underlying drawing. So it didn't really save me that much time. But we were both trying to go as fast as we could to get it out of the gate. But it worked out really well in the end.
Because then when I saw you, when you did X-Men later, after that, there was that Jim Lee style again. Obviously it was your art, but when the pencils were edgier but tight and like that 90s style.
Yeah.
But see, that's one of the reasons why you're one of my favorite artists, is because I like all different types of styles, and you capture them so well. Like the Joe Mad cartoony, but yet very energetic, the tight pencils like the Jim Lees and the Liefelds and all that, and but very energetic. You go from edgy to lighthearted. And then like Supergirl, tight pencils but lighthearted, soft. It was soft, but it fit. You know,
Yeah.
so I just love it. I love the dynamics of when you draw.
Thank you very much. I really do appreciate that. You know, it's nice to hear somebody say that, because, you know, the majority of your time you'll spend hunched over a desk, not really talking to anybody until you go to shows, and then you get the feedback. So whenever anybody says that they like what I've done, it is really gratifying, because you don't get to hear it that often. These days with chat boards and forums and all that sort of stuff, I guess it's easier to interact with people, but I don't do a lot of online stuff, as you probably know.
Exactly. And when I reached out to you a few years ago to do the jam piece, I didn't know if I'd even get a response. I didn't know if, you know, or anything. And your lovely wife, got back to me right away, and it was just a pleasant interaction. And I got it in the mail, and I honestly, I was like, oh my God, this is incredible. And I'm bragging to everybody, I got Ian Churchill on my jam. I got Ian Churchill on my jam. I got Ian. I'm like a little kid telling everybody. So I mean, it was awesome. Jacob Bear wanted to ask you, how did Coven come about? Is that your own creation?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, Coven I created when I was 17, and I was, like I said, I went to a graphic design place as a apprenticeship, but I also had a day release college course that I went to, so one day a week I'd go to college and do an art class, and I ended up going less and less frequently, because there was more deadlines at work and what have you. So I felt that I should stay at work rather than going to college. But I created the Coven while I was at college, and as I recall, Pentacle was one of the characters, and initially, well, I don't know if, I can't remember whether Pentacle was actually in. She was in the published comic eventually, I think. But the team was a different setup when I first created them. There was a character called Pentacle, and she was very Rob Liefeld influenced, because I had just seen some stuff that Rob had done, and I thought, oh, that looks pretty cool. So she was kind of Rob Liefeld influenced. The rest of the team were probably more influenced by Alan Davis on Excalibur at the time.
It's one of my favorite books of all time.
The original concept.
Claremont and Davis was. Oh, I loved it.
I was going to say the original concept sketches for Scratch were very much, looking back at them, like how Alan drew Nightcrawler. He looked very similar, just red skin, I suppose, and I guess, yeah, pretty much like Nightcrawler in a suit. that's what Scratch looked like when I first created it. But I was 17 when I created the Coven, and I was just very lucky that Jeff and Rob got together and created Awesome. So I got the opportunity to publish them eventually. And that first arc, I plotted the first arc. Jeff scripted it and filled in all the gaps for me, because I was still very young and what have you. But I've still got the original outline that I plotted, with the first.
Wow, really?
Somewhere, yeah. I saw it the other day. I kept a lot of stuff from the 90s. So yeah, I was, and Awesome were prepared to take a chance on publishing it, and it worked out well. Everybody seemed to, I mean, obviously Awesome didn't end so well, but in the early days when it was all pumping and firing on all thrusters, it was a great place to work, and I had a great time working with Jeff and Rob on that.
He wants to know if there's any chance of bringing Coven back.
I wouldn't think so at the moment. It's not something that I've ever thought about revisiting, I suppose. The way things were left at the end of Awesome, it was a little bit convoluted. So it's probably a dog best left sleeping at the moment, I would think. Having said that, I did create a group of characters recently which are cousins, let's say, of the Coven. So if I get the opportunity to do that at some point, maybe the people that like the Coven would enjoy that. I can't say much more because I create so much stuff. But if I told you what it was called, then someone would go out and publish it straight away, or suddenly come up with the same characters. You know, you've got to be so.
So there's your answer, Del.
Sorry.
Del had asked about any other original projects, so you just pretty much answered his question. I want to let him know that you can't really say all the things in your head anyway. It's sad but true. You have to keep it quiet until you have a copyright.
Yeah, it drives me insane, because something will just pop in and I'll have to develop it, and so I've got all this stuff that's just hanging there in the ether, and then I have to think to myself, well, I hope somebody doesn't come up with that in the meantime, because that would completely scratch the entire concept, because if someone if I had something in my head and somebody went and published it and did it, then I certainly wouldn't pursue it, because what would be the point? I had number of years back, I had an idea for something called, I think I was going to call it the Comic-Con, and it was a heist based around a comic convention, and then suddenly there were 3 different comics from different people doing something similar to that.
Oh boy!
And I thought, well, I can't do that now. But it would have been. I think I'd just seen that. It was one of the Ocean's films, I think, one of the heist films, and I thought, wouldn't that be great at a comic show? And that's how.
That's too bad.
It is too bad, but I have ideas like this all the time. I had one the other day, which I am really toying with.
Don't tell us, because somebody will steal it.
No, I can't. Yeah, but it was.
I gotta protect you.
Done that yet? And I thought, if I give it a go. But I
you can tell me backstage later.
Yeah.
I won't tell a word.
I think to this stuff, and then someone, comes up with it, or while I'm developing a project, I'll get someone who'll phone me up or knock on my door or something and say, do you want to come and do this with me? And if it's paid work, then I've got to sort of like set it aside, come back to it, and keep, so it's a real, comic books in general, being a professional comic book artist / writer, it is a juggling act. You got your paid gigs in one hand, and you got your create your own stuff, and you have to just keep trying to keep the balls in the air.
But you also need the paying gig to fund the creative stuff, so it's really hard not to just turn it down.
Precisely.
Jacob's trying to. He's like, no, tell us, do it. Of all the books you've worked,
it's not a superhero thing. I'll tell you that much.
I don't think anybody would care. We just love to see you put something out. Of all the books that you've done that aren't creator owned, what was your favorite book that you worked on?
That aren't creator owned, or
yeah, that aren't yours,
like
the DC and Marvel stuff, things like that.
Well, anything that I worked on with Jeff was always fun.
Okay.
Jeff and I get on really well, and we work well together. And I was very lucky to be one of the co-creators of Red She-Hulk, just because I happened to say yes to Jeff when he was trying to convince me to take on that Code Red thing, So between
even though they're not using her, even though they're not really using Red She-Hulk anymore.
From my perspective, it's a character that Marvel own that I helped co-create, and I just like the kudos of that. It's kind of a nice feather in your cap, I suppose. But no, yeah, pretty much everything that I've worked on with Jeff, I've enjoyed. I enjoyed Blue Devil. I've always liked, and I did a short story with Dan Didio when I was when he was still at DC. That was a Halloween story. I enjoyed working on that because at DC, I've always loved Blue Devil, and
I like the aesthetics of the character.
Sorry,
I like the aesthetics of the character.
I do too. What I really liked, I suppose, was the original setup, where there was he had a weirdness factor, which
Well, he was an actor who the costume.
Well, yeah, he got stuck in the exoskeleton, but the magic that stuck him in the exoskeleton had something called a weirdness factor, which kind of got forgotten along the way, but it justified every story that happened to him, especially in my head. The weirdness factor was anything that probably could happen to him would happen to him, which sets up for some great stories, and they can be really wacky or they can be really sort of serious,
Right.
but completely justifiable because of this quirk of his power set, and I always found that very appealing. And the other character at DC that I've always loved but I've never got to work on, even though I'd been pushing for it a number of years, was Captain Atom. I love Captain Atom.
Very underused. I mean, they even got rid of him, the Top Cow, and then they got him back, right?
Yeah, and that was mainly because I had a complete run of Ditko's Captain Atom. When I was a kid, I had when I was about 10. I had a comic collectors club that I created. A bunch of kids in the neighborhood, we'd created this club, and we'd all come together and talk about the comics that we'd read recently and all that sort of stuff. Excuse me. And I had a next door neighbor, and the next door neighbor he looked a bit like John Lennon, and had the long hair and the little round glasses sometimes, and his name was Xavier, of all things. I'm not kidding. His name was Xavier, John Xavier, and he was into comics, and he knew that we were all into comics, and we were having like a little meeting on the driveway of the house. And he came out one day and he said, "You guys are into comics. Do you want some comics?" And my mum had always been saying, "Don't go next door. Don't talk to that man." And all this, he's don't talk to strangers and all that sort of stuff. And of course, that all went out the window, and it's like, "Yeah, we love comics. Give us some comics." So he came out with this long boxes of comics, and divvied them all up between the people in the club. I got the lion's share because it was, I was the next door neighbor and it was my club. But he gave me like you remember those old photo albums that had the sticky sleeves, so you put it back.
I still have them in the closet. Yeah.
He brought out one of those, and I kid you not, it had the complete run of Fantastic Four from number 1 to 30, but only the covers. He'd taken all the covers off and put them into this. Yeah,
oh my Lord!
Into this photo album. So there were no interiors. And
oh my God!
And it wasn't just that. It had like Ditko Spider-Man. It had like all of the early Marvel stuff, but just the covers. I mean, I was blown away just to have them, but it was literally just the covers. But along with that, he also had the entire run of Ditko's Captain Atom. So I sat and read those, from start to finish, and during that time became a big Captain Atom fan. So I've always
Jacob actually corrected me. He's right. It wasn't Top Cow, it was Wildstorm that he was with. That they moved him to before he came back. They
put him back in the shiny gold costume with the red, didn't they? Yeah.
Yeah.
Originally, his costume was originally it was burgundy and silver for one.
Yeah.
And then they changed it to red and gold. Mm-hmm. And then it went to the redesign where he had like the silver arms and the red legs. And, and then it kind of got changed from there. I think then it went to the completely chrome with the red blob on his chest, didn't it? After that.
Yeah. By the way, Norm has been pretty silent. Usually he heckles me. The Blue Devil story had old men Charlie Brown and Linus in there. I know he said he didn't know it was them until after.
He should know. He inked it. It's the Great Pumpkin, wasn't it? It was Charlie Brown and Linus in the pumpkin field, and they were sacrificing themselves to raise this big pumpkin. But it wasn't specifically said that it was. Well,
for copyright reasons, but yeah.
But it was implied, and the character had like the stripy jumper, the stripy sweater.
That's funny.
Yeah.
So if you could work on any book of your choice right now, what title would it be, and who would you choose to be a creative team with you? And you better say Norm as the inker because he's here.
Curse that iPad Pro. Curse that iPad Pro. Sorry, Norm. Do you know what I've always wanted to do? Because, like I was saying to you earlier, I'm a big Alan Davis fan. And I'm a huge Captain Britain fan. Before Alan recreated Captain Britain. The Herb Trimpe stuff with Chris Claremont.
With the scepter and the...
Loved all that. I really loved all that.
I love that character design too.
I do. And I was thinking about it a few years ago, and again quite recently. I would love to do some stories with the first iteration of Captain Britain in the red costume with the scepter, but written by Alan. I'd love to do some stories set between then and when he became the redesign by Alan. You know?
Nice.
There was a British comic book called Hulk Weekly, I think it was, the Hulk Weekly, yeah. And there was a backup strip in there, which a lot of people haven't seen stateside. But it was the Black Knight with Captain Britain, and it was all set in Otherworld. And the general setup was he'd fallen out of a plane on a transatlantic flight. I think they said it was on the way back from his team up with Spider-Man, the Byrne thing, you know. So he's flying back to the UK, gets attacked on the plane, falls out, is shipwrecked somewhere, but it turns out it's not in our realm. It's in an otherworld thing. It was all supernatural and magic with the Black Knight and Captain Britain, and it was supposed to get him accustomed to thinking outside of his narrow confines for the stories that would be coming ahead, something like that. And it was lovely. It was really well drawn, very, very moody. I can't remember, the artist escapes me at the moment. I want to say John Bolton, but I don't think it was.
I
really can't remember. Anyway, so those stories exist, and that's supposed to be set between the end of Captain Britain Weekly and the redesign by Alan. So I think there's a whole section of stories that you could slot in either before that set of stories or after, because they never used Hurricane again, and Hurricane was a great villain. You know, it would just take one line to make him a mutant, and then they could resurrect him and they could do whatever they want to do. It would be so cool.
And who would you be your inker and colorist?
Oh, it'd be Norm. Norm would be my inker. Colorist, if I had the time, I'd love to have a bash myself. But Alex Salazzo, I'd like him to do it. Or is it Maury Hollowell? I think he does really good colours.
I really would love to see that done. So, all right, we're gonna have to pitch it, guys. Pitch it. Norm laughed. He said, "Ha." He's like, "Listen, Norm. He must be sincere."
Every time I see Norm saying "ha," I've got the little icon of him with the Wolverine thing coming up. You know, so that makes me laugh.
Oh, honestly, I'm surprised it's not a Twizzlers between his fingers. But Norm, he doesn't have to butter you up by saying that. He could just send you the candy. J.E. asked you, you had mentioned comic strips. Have you ever thought of doing a comic strip?
Comic strip as in what?
Like in the papers, I guess. You know how they have the strips in the papers, or like the Spider-Man and stuff like that? Unless I'm wrong, J.E., correct me.
Yeah, I thought about it. I thought about it recently. I don't know really how you go about doing that. I was thinking of that format recently, about maybe, if I had the time, doing like a 3-panel thing ongoing on my Facebook page or something like that, something that I wouldn't necessarily make money at, but would just scratch that itch maybe.
Right.
But it's finding the time, really. I don't know enough about comic strips and how they work and how you make money doing them to have really given it that much thought.
What if you could get your Captain Britain comic strip?
I'm sorry, what was that?
What if you get a Captain Britain comic strip?
Well, that would work, I suppose. But no, if I was doing the Captain Britain thing, I would love Alan to write it, just so you know, from a fanboy perspective, just so I get to work with Alan Davis. He's just great,
Nice.
and I happen to think he's an absolutely brilliant writer. I think all the stuff he did on Excalibur was amazing, and the nail for DC.
I agree.
I love his writing. He doesn't write enough, in my opinion. He's a superb artist, but I think he's just as good at writing as he
And
is.
he's such a nice gentleman. He drew on one of my jams, Nightcrawler. I told you Mark Farmer inked it, so that was like a highlight that had to be on there. And then I saw him again another show, just speaking to him. He's standing on the floor. He came over. He started talking to me for a while, and it's sometimes you get the impression like you're keeping someone.
Mm.
He doesn't give you that impression. He just hung out, talked with me. It was just a great pleasure.
He's a lovely guy, and so
I want to get the British invasion at my show. You and Barry and him, we'll get you all over there.
I was at a show with Alan, and they had, I think, A2 sort of size flip charts, with markers and stuff. And there was me, a couple of other people I can't remember, and Alan was there. And we, in succession, we had to get up and draw a character on the thing, and us, all of us were professionals, let's say, but there were 3 less professionals, including myself, and then there's Alan Davis, and the 3 of us, whoever it was, we got up and we did our best in the time that we had, and Alan almost, with his eyes closed, just directly in Sharpie, just drew the thing. And it was beautiful, absolutely beautiful. And it was almost like no effort for him. He just sort of went. And it's
when
done.
he did the Nightcrawler on my jam, he didn't like the layout. He goes, "Do you mind if I change this?" I said, "You do whatever the hell you want." And he flipped him upside down. I wish I could show you. It's up there where he's doing a backflip. It's beautiful. And he just changed it.
I don't mean to interrupt you. I was just going to say I was at a show with Mark Farmer and Alan, and this was around the time that Marineman had just come out, or shortly after. And Mark had been telling Alan about it, and I gave a copy to Alan, and he was standing there with Mark, and he said, "Do you collect artwork, original artwork?" And I said, "I don't. Generally, because I don't normally have enough cash to go around collecting original artwork. But I said I do as and when I can." And he gave me a piece of artwork.
Wow.
I've got it somewhere here, I think.
That'd be beautiful to see. By the way, while you're looking for that, Norm said you send the best candy.
I know. Whoa. Sorry, light fell down. Oh.
Don't break anything on my account.
I'm trying not. That was Norm's fault.
Yeah.
He shouldn't have said I send the best candy. But I do. I look after Norm. Norm's looked after as far as the candy goes. Just bear with me.
Norm is a good guy. Hey, Norm, I've got chocolate Twizzlers right here, Norm. Too bad you're not here. I've got them right here.
In the studio, so I've got stuff all over the place. But hold on.
Back that way, yeah. Oh, wow. I remember that run on X-Men, too. Wow. Yeah. That's when X-23 was introduced.
And it's got the Fury as well from Captain Britain. And he just gave it to me.
Oh, wow.
I was blown away.
Wow.
That's heavy.
As long as you don't break it, don't break the frame, please.
Yeah, don't want to break it.
So, talking about conventions, what was one of your most, I don't know, crazy or just interesting or standout moments at a convention for you? I mean, it could be anything from someone you met that you always wanted to meet, to a fan interaction, to just the convention itself.
Oh, there was one in South Africa, actually. Where was it? It was at the show. There were a bunch of girls all dressed as Deadpool, and they were all standing in a row, and I was either laying on the ground, sort of like in a Playboy Burt Reynolds pose or something, or they were holding me up all in a line. But that stands out because that doesn't happen often.
That's great.
But aside from that, it shows nothing. I can't think of anything that really sticks out that's been out of the ordinary. Let's say.
Is there anybody that you got to meet at a show that you were like, oh my god, besides Alan Davis, or anybody that you'd like to that you haven't yet?
I'd love to meet John Romita.
I'm sorry, hang on. Norman says he's got to head out. Love you, Ian, and Philip looks like a giant. Well, the funny thing is, I was told that my head is usually the only thing you see because I was trying to show the art behind me, and people would tell me, no, you got to show more of your torso. So I do that, but Ian's chair went down, so Ian's like a little lower than me.
I'll bring it up a bit higher. There we go.
There you go. Norm, thanks for coming out. See you later.
See you, Norm.
So I'm sorry, you were saying.
What was I saying?
We were talking about someone you met that you really wanted to meet at a convention.
John Romita Sr. I'd love to meet because I've never met him. I've met his son a few times. He's a nice guy. But I'd love to meet his dad because, I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing if it hadn't been for John Romita Sr.
It's too bad, yeah.
Yeah, and what else? Who else would I like to meet? I met Stan Lee one year. That blew me away. That was with Jeff at the lobby of the Hyatt, I think, in San Diego. And Jeff knew Stan, or knew him well enough to call him over. And Stan came over and said hello to Jeff. And Jeff said, "This is my buddy," and he said, "Hi, how are you?" And then off he was gone. Yeah. But I met Stan Lee. That was great. Who else have I met that I wasn't expecting to? Oh, Shatner. I met William Shatner one year.
Did he talk like this?
He was really nice. I was waiting to go to the airport, and I was in the green room. This was in Toronto, one of the Toronto shows, and he just happened to be standing next to me, and I turned round, and it was like, "You're William Shatner." And he goes, "Yes, I am. I'd just like to shake your hand." And that.
Well, you're a Trek fan, right?
Yeah, I love Trek. But there's a group of actors from my childhood that I'd like to meet, and I've met some of them. He was one because growing up in the 70s, they're icons, and
yeah.
To me, William Shatner's one. Lee Majors, I'd love to meet.
And he's a nice guy in real life. Very nice.
I would think he was, and I'd like to hope he was as well, because
he is. He's very nice.
You don't want to be disappointed by the people you meet,
well, I met you for the first time today, and I was very happy.
But I'd love to meet him. I was lucky enough to meet Adam West before he passed away.
Oh, okay.
So that was another one of the icons. Lindsay Wagner, I'd like to meet. Linda Carter.
I met Erin Gray from Buck Rogers and Gil Gerard. Gil Gerard is hysterical, and Erin Gray is such a graceful, lovely woman. It was cool. Yeah.
I'll bet it was. Bob Layton's friends with Erin Gray.
Is he?
So I've almost met her a few times when I've done shows with Bob, but I haven't yet. And I took a year out of comics a long time ago now. It must have been about 2001, something like that, and went travelling. On that year out, John Cassaday was doing a show in Australia, and he was on stage with Gil Gerard and Erin Gray, and I saw him afterwards, and he said, "You should have told me you were here. I could have got you up, and you could have met me."
Oh no!
And I didn't want to sort of like spook him or sort of show up and and try and muscle my way in. But I was part of the audience. I was part of the convention.
Steve Garcia has a lifelong crush on Erin Gray.
Yeah,
well, Steve, if you never met her, you'd still be crushing on her. She's a lovely woman.
Yeah.
Very intelligent too. What's the craziest commission you ever got? A commission request?
They normally seem to be straightforward. I had one guy ask me for Supergirl but nude, and I said, well, you know, if she hasn't got a costume on, how do you know it's Supergirl? You know? On girl. So that was a weird. So I didn't do it, but it was a weird one. I don't feel comfortable doing that sort of stuff with characters that I don't own, or you know, other people's.
Right.
So I tend to shy away from those. But you know, I don't have a problem with nudity or anything like that. I've had people come up and just ask me to draw a nude woman reclining like an old master's, you know, like an old master's painting sort of would be, and I've done stuff like that. But for characters like, you know, superheroes with no clothes on, I tend to sort of like back off from it. But that's the only real sort of unusual commission request that I can remember off the top of my head, at least.
So, what advice would you give any aspiring artist trying to break into the industry now?
Have some thick skin, because you're gonna get rejected a lot, probably. I think in some ways it's probably easier to break in now because of all the different platforms you've got that, you know, people can see your work in far more places. You know, I was, like I said, I was very lucky to be hired at a time when comics were just booming. You know, there was no stopping comics. I mean, luckily in recent times they've been on a bit of an upswing again. I don't envy anyone trying to break in at the moment, but I would say from an artistic standpoint, draw all the things that you hate drawing the most, because it's the only way you're going to get better at it, and you know, hone your craft, so to speak. When I was learning how to draw and stuff, I used to hate drawing hands, and at some point I realized I had to bite the bullet and learn how to draw hands, because you have to
Toughest thing.
Everything. You have to be able to draw everything when you draw comics. And they are tough, drawing hands. But, you know, perversely, let's say, drawing hands is one of my favourite things now. Because I've done it so much to try.
When you get good at something, you tend to start liking it. It's because you're not good at something that you usually don't like it. So
Yeah. And it's the satisfaction of when the penny drops or the light bulb goes on, you know, above your head. That's how you do it. It's the same with feet. You used to hate drawing feet. And there's so many ways you can get around drawing feet in comics if you want to. But eventually you have to draw a foot, and it's, you know, when it suddenly clicks, there's nothing better. I still don't like drawing feet, but I'm okay at it now. But hands, I love drawing hands. Love drawing hands. No, but the question was advice on how to get in, or
just advice in general for aspiring artists.
Yeah, I draw every day. Don't just look at comics. Look at other stuff. Look at everything around you. If photo reference helps you, grab it, use it, do what you want with it. There's no right way or wrong way. There's whatever gets you to where you want to be, I would say. Some people frown on photo reference, other people. I personally don't use it, but that's mostly because I grew up in a time when it wasn't really what the professionals did. They'd think, they'd get the plot, they'd see it in their head, they'd draw it out. And that's how I was brought up to do things.
What would you say to people? Like, my wife is a very talented artist, but she has trouble drawing from her mind. She needs reference all the time, and it bothers her. and it's killing her confidence because she feels like I shouldn't need reference. I should be able to draw from my mind. She also doesn't get to draw a lot. That's the problem. What would you say, or what would you recommend to someone that's having that issue?
Yeah, I would say draw as much as you can. It's the
Would
only
you
way.
recommend from life more than anything, so there's no reference, or?
Yeah, I mean, if you, let's say you wanted to be more proficient at drawing a horse, for example, if you had lots of reference material, photographs of horses, and drew from those photos day in, day out, for at least an hour or more a day, but just stuck to doing that, eventually you'd see where all the muscles are and how it all works, and you'd get to a point where you don't need those pictures anymore
Gotcha.
because you can just see it in your head. When I was learning, I would look a lot at comics, but mostly for storytelling elements. How to tell the story. How to draw comics the Marvel way was a big learning curve for me, and was very instrumental in my understanding of how things worked as far as comics go, and line weights and all sorts of stuff. Storytelling, that was just that was remarkable. But yeah, it's just repetition. It's muscle memory. And real memory as well. It's just remembering where things go. So many aspiring artists draw what they think's there. As far as anatomy goes, the muscles in a stomach, they'll do like 100 stomach muscles, and there are only a certain amount.
I noticed some people would do a space between the abs and the torso. There is no space there.
No,
And a lot of people draw a gap there, and they don't realize.
Mostly it's because they've seen that done by professionals in comics, and they just want to draw like the professional that they love in comics. That's normally how that comes about. There's not really that sticky outy bit at the top of the rib cage that you see in comics so much either.
Right.
It goes down when someone stands sideways. It's kind of, in comic books, it's like boring like that, but in reality, it's kind of forward,
if you want reality, I can stand up for you.
You can do the realistic stance and still make it muscular and heroic. Mike Turner is very good at doing that. If you look at Mike Turner, his heroes aren't arching their backs. They're normally slumping forward with their shoulders, but he's got all those muscles going down there, and everyone's ripped to shreds, muscle-wise. But so they're standing in very natural positions majority of the time, but looking buffed up and ripped and heroic at the same time. So it's all a case of just looking at what's around you and not concentrating too much on what you see in comics. And the more you draw these things, the more it becomes second nature. Obviously in comics you overemphasize stuff, and you can look at a photograph to get an idea for a pose or reference material, but you can't really slavishly copy it because it won't look right. It will, superhero proportions aren't natural world proportions. You can get elements of it, but at some point you've got to inject some artistic flair to give it life. If you slavishly trace or copy a photograph, it's always going to look traced or copied.
Right.
It's not going to have any life. I'm sorry, what was that?
It doesn't capture the natural energy because it's just a copy.
Exactly.
It was very still.
It's fine to learn where everything goes and how to do it, but eventually you've just got to stand on your own 2 feet and do it from your head. And once you've got those elements arranged in your head from the reference material that you've poured over the how many hours you've worked at it, eventually it'll all be up there, and once it is up there, you have to start drawing from your head, and the more you draw from your head, the more it will come naturally and the more it will look right. And then once you've got it on paper, then you can look at your photos just to see, oh, well, I missed the ears don't go that way. And then you can correct things and just make small and minor adjustments. But it will never have any life unless you draw it from your head in the first place. You get the foundations out of your head, and then you can tweak it by looking at
Right.
photo reference, and that's normally a good approach.
I'll tell her that because you know, I didn't really think about that. It doesn't have to be all or nothing. You can start drawing from your head, and then, like you said, use reference to just clean it up.
Yeah, I'm just going to move the iPad because it's running low on battery.
Sure.
Still with you.
Well, I'm actually going to ask you the question that I usually end up with everyone.
Oh, yeah?
If you could go back in time to when you were first starting out, what advice would you give yourself?
That is tough. Don't be so bloody serious. I would say laugh more. Don't drink as much. I don't remember half of the 90s. You know, I used to drink a lot back in the 90s.
So sobriety and self-deprecation are the key.
And suck those cheeks in.
Yeah.
You know, yeah, I don't know what that. As far as art goes, walk to the beat of my own drum more rather than listening to what other people say. Have the courage of my artistic convictions. If I had stuck with the cartoony style rather than trying to draw like Jim, I probably wouldn't have got as much work, but I would have been known more for the way I draw rather than or the way I perceive myself as drawing rather than the way that everybody else perceives the way I draw, if that makes sense.
It makes sense. And I actually find it interesting that I learned that about you. That's really cool. And I thought it was great because I always felt that your style can change. You're like a chameleon of artists, which I found great. But I didn't know if it was just my interpretation of it or what. But, you know, just listening to what you're saying, I was like, oh, cool. I did kind of pick up on that. I did get that.
Yeah. I mean, most artists can you know, employ a number of different styles, I've found.
But like you said, you stick with what works, right? I mean, if you got known for this, you stick with it.
Yeah. And it's yeah, I can't think of anything else I'd say to myself, my younger self.
Stay confident, stay sober, and take it easy.
And yeah, be ready for the sacrifices that you have to make. You know, and again, this is to aspiring comic book artists. It's a lot of hours that you have to put in when you draw comic books, and the amount of times that I've been invited out to go see my friends and hang out and stuff, and I've had to say no, I can't. I've got to get this finished, you know, and be working until 2, 3, 4 o'clock in the morning sometimes, you know.
And a good chiropractor and 4 pairs of glasses.
Yeah, exactly. God, if I'd known that was all coming, I'd have got to be a marine biologist.
Yeah. Well, at least you keep swimming.
Yeah, keep swimming.
So Jacob had asked, we had gone over this, but yeah. So is Marine Man more your style than compared to Coven? Yeah,
definitely. Yeah. Marine Man is pretty much how I draw naturally, but that's how it comes out when I'm not thinking, so to speak. When I draw what people call mainstream comics, I have to think about that detailed stuff, that really detailed stuff, because it's kind of like it's having to remember. If I draw like a 90s inspired piece these days, it's in my head. I see it in Marine Man style, and so it comes out roughly like Marine Man style, and then I have to remember where I put all what I consider unnecessary lines and rendering that everybody likes from the 90s to make it look the way people expect it to look, if that makes sense. You
had done a commission for someone you posted online. It was dominoes sitting on like a throne, and it had like Iron Man.
Yeah, Iron Man. Yeah.
It was incredible.
Thank you. I had a lot of fun doing it, but it was a pain. It was really difficult to do that.
The detail Yeah, the detail and the background, and Domino herself, it was incredible.
Yeah, well, thank you. I like Domino. She's a great character. I've never been asked to draw the movie Domino. I really like the movie Domino.
Yeah, she's one of my
But
favorite characters.
yeah, but it was fun drawing that commission. It's just a case of, these days with colouring being as good as it is, with modern technology, the majority of art styles that I've seen that are out there at the moment tend to be so pared down. There's no rendering at all, and a lot of it's left to the colorist. So
Right.
I think these days you can be far more economical with your line. You don't have to do all that rendering and stuff. And I think it's the rendering that makes a 90s comic look
Right.
90s. The underlying drawing generally is the same as it's always been, but there was just so much more cross-hatching and rendering and reflections everywhere, and which made it look cool and exciting. But it's also what makes 90s stuff look very dated now as well in some respects.
I still love it, but again,
I do too.
I can look at the '90s and love it, and I can look at Marineman and love that too. So
yeah.
And again, especially when you're trying to tell a story when it fits the story. I mean, Marineman, I don't think would work well if you didn't draw it. I mean, I don't think it would work as well if you didn't draw it cartoony like that. It would. I don't. It wouldn't look. It wouldn't fit. It just wouldn't fit.
Right. No, it'd be the wrong tone because the tone of the story lends itself well to that particular art style.
I agree.
You could get away with it, drawing it in a harder edge style.
Sure, but it would lose a little bit in translation.
It would lose the charm. Yeah, it certainly would. Yeah.
Does anybody have any questions to ask before we say thank you to Ian and go, or say speak now or forever hold your peace? Well, we're waiting for them. Seriously, I was very excited to do this show. I was very excited to meet you. I had never met you. I only knew what you look like based on the picture you see when you Google.
Oh, that was a horrible picture you used on the
I'm sorry, I didn't have much to go on. I mean, because the only picture I see is one on Facebook where you're looking up and you got the glasses and the hat, so you don't even see your face. But seriously, you're one of my all-time favorites. I also was very grateful for what you did for the Jam, and just an amazing job. And this was one of those things I'm going to get to tell everybody. Hey, I got to meet and talk to Ian Churchill for a couple hours, So this was I was really excited about this show. Mark it on my calendar. My birthday's next week, so this was a birthday gift for me.
Happy birthday.
Thank you. Yeah, this was a birthday gift for me. So I'm very grateful that you came out. And please tell your wife she's been nothing but lovely and wonderful to deal with through email. Prior transactions and prior things going as well as the show. And I wish you both well.
Thank you.
Continued success. Yeah. And I look forward to Marineman Volume 2 when you get to it. But before you go, please, anything you want to plug or anything you want to just mention to us?
Marineman, go and buy it. It's still available on Amazon and all other reputable comic stores. Trade paperback. Aside from that, the history graphic novels. That's currently what I'm working on, the covers for them. So I think I've got one here. Just a second. Bear with me.
And please, when anything's completed, feel free to let me know. I would be happy to promote and share it on my social media.
Okay.
Absolutely. And I'm going to do a video review of Marineman.
I look forward to that. That'd be great.
Yeah. Jacob, by the way, while you're looking for it, Jacob had said, thanks for talking with us. Up until I watched this, I always thought you were from California.
I wish I was in California. There you go. We got
nice.
Weather's better in California.
Did you just do the pencils or did you do inks, colors?
Did the whole thing.
Oh, wow.
J.G. Rochelle from Comicraft rather did the design and the typography, but I did the drawing. That's Ben
Very
Frank
nice.
there. Hold on. We got Disney.
Oh wow, my wife will love that.
And they're great. They're educational. Oh, there's one I can't show you yet. We've got Babe Ruth.
Oh, nice.
Which was fun.
Jacob loves them too.
Anthony.
Susan B. Anthony.
It's more Marine Man style, these ones.
But again, it's not like cartoony. There's still that tightness to it. I love it. It's great.
But it's not quite like the stuff I do in the comic books.
Steve also said thank you to you. A great show, and you're a fantastic artist and an inspiration. He said thank you for that.
Oh, thank you.
And Steve worked on the Iron Giant, the movie The Iron Giant.
Oh wow!
Yeah, he's done other stuff as well, but that's just what I throw out there because I love that movie. Steve, he's a great guy. He's also an excellent illustrator. So
cool. Thanks. Appreciate it.
All right. Well, we'll keep an eye out for those books, and anytime they come out, please feel free to share them. I'll share them. I'll post them. I'll promote, and I will of course do for Marine Man. This was fantastic. I really hope to be able to speak with you again. I hope to see you at a show.
Yeah, you and me both. That'd be fantastic.
I'm actually having a very small show on December 6th to help out local artists because they're struggling. It'll be COVID safe. I'm a nurse, so I'm infection control is my career.
Yeah.
So it's very small, but so it also gives hope. We want to give hope to people that we can get back to this.
Sure.
But anyway, it was a great pleasure to have you on and meet you. If you wouldn't mind hanging backstage just for a minute.
Yeah, sure. Thanks
for coming out, and everybody say see ya.
Bye.
John said thanks, great show.
Thanks for tuning in.
All right, Ian, thank you so much. I'll see you in 1 minute.
Okay, see you soon.
All right, so that is awesome. I've always wanted to meet him and talk to him. I really love his work, and I'm going to do my jam shows. You'll see what he did on that jam when I go over Excalibur, which is actually probably my next week's jam show. Just incredible. And, they say be careful when you look to meet the people that you admire or that you've loved their work. There's no need to be careful. He, as you can see, is just an amazing guy, wonderful human being. His talent matches his personality. He's just awesome. So I'm so glad I got to meet Ian. But thank you all for coming out. I really appreciate, as always, your support. I do just want to remind you that I have the show December 6th. If you want to come out, we will be COVID safe, safer than any Walmart, and we have some great artists: Billy Tucci, Keith Williams, Larry Stroman, Sean Chen, Rodney Ramos, a lot of people. And the other thing is, I want to let you know, Friday at 10 p.m., we have Eric Nienaltowski will be our guest, and it will be 10 p.m. on Friday, the next Creatorcon Q&A. So, as usual, be legendary and have fun storming the castle.